Good day, ladies and gentlemen. This is Rodney Duffett, and I'll be presenting the Writing for Publication for Students and Staff workshop. I'm an Associate Professor in the Marketing Department from the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. So let me firstly introduce this workshop. Let me just say that by all means, I'm not a guru on writing for publication. I learn from each submission, revision, acceptance, rejection, as well as from co-authors and local research collaborations, as well as international partnerships. Personal experience, I have written 24 articles in a variety of local journals, as well as international journals. So I do have some experience, and so I'm going to pass that on to you. I'm also going to use my academic abilities to put this workshop together, and in fact I've spent the last 2 weeks reading and writing this workshop, as well as adding my own little personal experience anecdotes. So the reference list is also in this workshop at the end of this PowerPoint presentation, is also very important because it provides a list of very good sources that are freely available online, which you can use for additional reading. Since this workshop is just an overview of writing for publication, you may want greater depth of information. In fact, I've even found free textbooks that are 300 pages long on this topic, so you'll definitely be able to get more information from those sources. This workshop is explicitly aimed at new researchers, students, university staff, and others who might be interested in writing, in academic writing. So that's the main target, not for experienced researchers. The writing topics that will be covered in this workshop are publish or perish, types of periodicals, generic structure of a research article, the writing process, blocks to writing, selecting the right journal, the peer review process, and dealing with rejection. After I have done recording this paper, I will place it on YouTube for students. This workshop will be available on Blackboard. I obviously can't put the YouTube link in before I've uploaded it, so that I'll do later and insert it into the PowerPoint presentation. The approach I took to this workshop was I decided to write a full paper beforehand and then convert the paper into a PowerPoint presentation, which I'm presenting now. So if you'd like to download the full paper, I've given you the ResearchGate link, and it will provide a bit more detailed information than this PowerPoint presentation. So you can copy and paste that into your browser and you'll be able to get the full paper. Right, so let's move on to the first topic, which is publish or perish. So some of you have heard this term and may not be quite familiar with it, but really what it is that university staff need to submit academic research for publication in order to advance their careers, or so they get that impression. Failure to do so may inhibit their career progression. So it's often criticized because staff start to put more effort into the research and less time into teaching. And yes, Cape Peninsula University of Technology was formerly known as the Cape Technicon and Peninsula Technicon, as well as the Mowbray Teaching School and Granger Bay and the Wellington campus, and they eventually merged to become Cape Peninsula University of Technology. Prior to becoming a university, the focus was very much, in my opinion, on teaching and community engagement. But subsequent to the merger in 2005, the focus, well, there's definite push to drive or increase research activities. So, yes, since now we are a university. However, it depends on the individual what their focus is. In terms of my story, I really believe that it's difficult to maintain a balance between both teaching and research activities because there'll certainly be a cost. If you start putting more focus on research, then there might be less focus on teaching. In fact, there will be because there's only so many hours a day you can, devote to your work. Yeah, I started teaching or lecturing in 1997, and I can say the first 15 years of my teaching were pretty much dedicated to teaching with a little bit of research in between while I completed my master's degree and I wrote 3 journal articles for fairly low-key local journals. It was only about 7 or 8 years ago when I was in the middle of my doctorate degree that I really started becoming interested in research and started dedicating more time to it. Initially, it was a huge sacrifice because I had a full teaching load, I had departmental, faculty, and institutional responsibilities and activities. I was also supervising as well, and pretty much I worked 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. And well, pretty much nothing really has changed now, but yes, at least I'm doing more of what I want to do. After about 5 to 6 years, I had developed a fairly good track record with research, particularly in terms of publishing, and then I could request a little bit of teaching relief, which is in line with CPUT's work policy. And this gave me a bit more time to dedicate to publishing articles and to supervising. However, it's still quite difficult to maintain a balance because students generally come first and you take care of their needs, and then whatever time's left over, then you start working on other things that you really want to do. You know the story, a mechanic's car is always falling apart, a doctor's often sick, and so it is with a lecturer that sort of leaves their studies the lot till serves everyone else's needs and then yeah works on their own studies. So it is mandatory at CPUT for postgraduate students to submit articles at master's level. They need to submit a accredited journal article. DHET, by the way, stands for Department of Higher Education Training, and they need to submit one article, or they need to have a paper published in a peer-reviewed conference. Doctorate students require final acceptance of a DHET accredited article or a published peer-reviewed conference proceeding. So postgraduate students, it is very important for them to publish. So hopefully you'll find this presentation or workshop useful. Also, if you want to apply for CPT Conference Committee funding called ComCom funding, there are certain prerequisites in terms of the research units that you require. So a junior lecturer requires 0.25, a lecturer requires half, a senior lecturer 3/4 of a unit, associate professor 1 unit, a full professor 1.5 units, and someone that works in a research center 2 units. For postgraduate students who want to apply for funding, if they have a master's degree, they require 0.25 of a unit. If you're currently registered for a master's degree, you don't require any units. If you have obtained a doctoral degree, you require half a unit. And if you're currently registered for a doctorate degree, 0.25 units in order to qualify to apply for this funding. Now, I brought a new topic or mentioned a new topic, which is a research unit. And this pretty much ties in with publish or perish quite well. So DHET awards 1 research unit for a journal article which is published in a DHET accredited journal. And there is government funding for these research units, and that is why universities really want to get as many research output units as they possibly can, because it's worth money to the university and it's another form of income. Also, if you publish in with a number of authors, so if there's 4 authors for a specific article, you could be all at the same institution or different institutions across the country or the world, then those research units are split evenly. So if there's 4 authors, each author would get 0.25 of a unit. There are also number of other reasons besides you personally wanting to publish or the university putting pressure on you to publish. And other reasons could simply be to make a contribution to the existing body of knowledge in your discipline, to validate yourself as a scholar, to receive national or international recognition, to establish a reputation, to build professional networks, to secure research funding for your department and faculty, self-learning and development. It looks good on your CV if you have a whole string of articles. And it's also quite exhilarating eventually after a lot of hard work to see your name on a piece of published work that is available for the world to see. It's also important to go through the different types of periodicals before we delve deeper into this topic. Firstly, there's something called public or popular publications, and these are directed at consumer and business markets and mainly in the form of magazines. They cover a wide range of topics. They're typically short, a couple of pages at most. They provide entertainment and promote products through advertising, which is how they largely fund themselves. They cover topics from opinion pieces on celebrity to social issues, and sometimes they may provide an overview of academic research. They're filled with pictures and photographs, frequently in high glossy paper, although many have started to move to online formats as a means to save costs, but the problem is they struggle to attract the same advertising. They're mostly written by staff writers and freelancers, and they use everyday language, and they're internally audited, and they really reach a broad audience who doesn't need much expertise to read these magazines. The next form of periodicals is house journals. There's three major types. The first is external, aimed at external stakeholders, for example, shareholders. You have internal or in-house, which is mainly aimed at internal stakeholders or employees. And then you've got mixed, which are mixed house journals, which are aimed both at external and internal stakeholders. They mainly provide institutional news and information, and as well as opinions, reviews, management views. They foster goodwill to both external and internal stakeholders. Example of this was a CPUT bulletin, which used to be published but now has subsequently also moved to online format, as has many other house journals. And so again, house journals are not really aimed at academic research, although they're a very good platform to provide publicity for new and innovative research products within the institution. And let's move now to academic journals, which is the focus of this workshop. So academic journals really focus on specific topics in specialty fields. They provide the latest developments and original research or new knowledge. They're generally quite long and provide very great depth of information. So they're 5 to 30 pages long. And compared to popular press and house journals, which are usually a couple of pages or even a page at most, they are quite long. They really target at specialized audiences such as academics, students, researchers, scientists, professionals, industry specialists. There's various categories. So the most common category is the original research article or just a general research article, but there's book reviews, projects, theoretical and technical articles, conference proceedings, case studies, review papers, and letters. Previously, many of these journals were published on paper, but these days they're also moved mainly to online formats. Also, what differs journals from the periodicals and house journals is that they are peer evaluated or peer reviewed by fellow academics or specialists in the field, and they really judge then on their originality, the scholarly value, and academic soundness. So they also are edited internally, but this is after they are peer evaluated. These journals receive a DHE financial subsidy for the journal articles and other aspects that receive the DHE financial subsidy are published peer-reviewed conferences and books and book chapters. Now, it's not every journal that receives this DHET financial subsidy. It's only those listed in certain accredited journal indices. And the six lists that in South Africa that we use is the DHET list, Scopus, Web of Science, also known as WOS or ISI, the International Bibliography and Social Sciences, also known as IBSS, Norwegian list, and the Silo list are the six lists. And so as an academic at a university who wants to receive subsidy, it's important that you only target journals that are listed, and there are literally, 25,000 journals in the Scopus list alone, so that's excluding the other lists. There's a lot of journals to choose from. For a direct link, it's up on the PowerPoint presentation. You can click on that link and obtain that list. However, there is a problem with publishing, and predatory journals know the publish or perish phenomenon. They know that academics need to publish. And they basically they offer little benefit for the use of their services. Some journals are not deliberately predatory, but through maladministration, inexperience, and negligence, they become predatory. What are the predatory journal characteristics? Well, their main aim is to make money via page fees. They make phony claims, so they say they've got a high impact factor, or they're indexed on these lists when they're not. They publish poor quality papers due to little or no peer reviewing and editing. There are few manuscript submissions are rejected, so they basically accept everything they receive because it's a way of making more money, and there's very fast acceptance and publication procedures. There are harmful consequences for publishing them. Firstly, receive a substandard peer review. Your research could disappear after a certain period of time. You receive little exposure and low readership because your research is quite difficult to find. There are few citations because generally people know they're not of great quality, and could even damage your reputation as an academic or aspiring researcher. There is a list called Beale's list, and I've given you a direct link, which lists or up-to-date list of potential predatory publishers and journals. And so they can be accessed by that link. So check that they're not there. But even instead of checking the list, rather check that any journal you want to publish for is listed on the DHET accredited journal lists, and then you won't run into any problems. And I recommend that you only use this list because there's no point in publishing in some that's not accredited because you won't receive any subsidy. There are a lot of reputable publishers that have hundreds of journals that you can publish in, but only a handful of them are actually DHET accredited. So again, it's not worth if it's a big publisher to publish in a journal that's not accredited, because you're not going to receive any subsidy, and you're not necessarily going to receive as good exposure if it is. Okay, let's go on to the generic article structure, and I've provided other workshops, if you look in the reference list, that provide much greater detail on these topics. So this is simply just an overview of a research article structure, which is pretty much has the same headings as a thesis or a presentation, so they don't differ. Even your research proposal, many of the same headings appear here. But the major difference is the length, especially in terms of a thesis that can be 200 pages long, whereas a typical journal article is really between, I would say, 5 and 20 pages. So let's briefly cover over these, and as I say, there's other resources you can look for greater depth of the structure. But firstly, you start with the title, which should be clear, specific, accurate, unambiguous. It highlights the main keywords and subject content of the article, and it really is an advertisement. It's what should draw the people in, or the readers, the audience. It should attract them to read the article. So it really needs to be carefully crafted. Also, avoid technical jargon and abbreviations which people don't understand. And usually there's a word limit. For example, some journals limits the article to 15 words. And as I say, I'm not explaining how to write the title, but more or less just to give you some tips and guidelines as to what goes into the title and the other research article elements. Okay, I think I have skipped my abstract slide, so I will just speak you through the abstracts slide and I will add it in later. So the abstract summarizes the main sections of the research. It includes the research problem, methodology, main results and conclusions in a single paragraph. It's the second potential endpoint, which determines whether a reader is going to read the entire article or not. So it's essential that this component is well written. The abstract should be interested, accurate, and specific. The abstract should also be a standalone document, so together with the title and the abstract should be able to read independently of the article, and is also used for indexing purposes. There shouldn't be any references in an abstract. It's usually written last. It consists of 150 to 300 words, or the general length restrictions. And you also receive structured abstracts where you have mandatory headings such as the purpose, design and methodology, findings and results, research limitations, implications, practical and theoretical implications, and original value. I'll add in that slide after the presentation. Keywords are mainly used for indexing services. They are also used to label the manuscript. Avoid keywords with wide-ranging meanings that could be ambiguous, and only use well-known abbreviations. And this really helps people to find your research when you are sending it. In other words, that's what the index services are. The introduction provides you with background to the research study as well as the context, purpose, and rationale. It provides an overview of the research problem, questions, and/or hypothesis. It really also provides the primary theoretical underpinning and literature. It provides possible solutions and limitations, and most importantly, it provides the research gaps, which should also fall within the scope of the journal. The literature review is really the theoretical framework, which comprises of a number of sections which should create a golden thread, which sort of moves from broad to specific. So yeah, it starts with the background and industry. It provides an overview of the actual topic. It provides detailed information on past and current research. It provides a theoretical and conceptual framework, and many literature reviews end with the research objectives, questions, hypothesis, but these could be a separate section on their own. The research methodology really is the cornerstone of the manuscript. It provides a concise overview of the methodology and design followed during the research process. It starts off with how the research problem was investigated, and it should provide detailed information on this. It includes the methods and material, which could include the paradigm, the research method and approach, the research design, the sampling and research processes. It also should provide detailed information on the data collection process, which includes, for example, questionnaires, semi-structured interviews, and how those are the research instruments, and how the data was actually collected. And finally, it usually includes ethical considerations. The next section is the results and findings, which should provide the main results clearly, succinctly, objectively, to provide an overview of the research, which is important for your discussion section. It also should highlight unforeseen research results, as well as provide robust statistical analysis in terms of reliability and validity. Much of the research findings could be placed in tables and figures, which logically and graphically portray the results in a very easy to read or easy to understand manner. And usually in the results and findings sections, you do not You do not include the discussion or conclusion, you just give the findings. Although some authors combine the results and discussion sections into one. The discussion should provide a concise, informative overview, and it should correspond with your results and your initial introduction. It also highlights and explains and analyzes and interprets and discusses the most significant relationships, principles, generalizations, and results. And it also compares your results versus other published research. In other words, it explains the why of your findings in terms of whether they're similar or different to other discourse. The conclusions really show or highlight the impact of the research. They should be linked and explain and answer your objectives, questions, and hypotheses. They should make theoretical contributions for education, research, and even provide new frameworks. They should highlight practical and managerial implications for people in industry who would like to apply the research, and often either as a separate section or at the end of this section, most authors provide limitations and recommendations for future research. The next section is acknowledgements. So these are people that have assisted you with the study, and you want to give them due recognition for what they've done for you. So examples are financial funders, institutional supporters, consultants, organizational approvals, material suppliers, proofreaders, technical and support staff, participants and respondents, and also potential conflict of interests could be listed here or as a separate section. The reference list very much depends on the journal style, and these are usually highlighted in the journal's author guidelines. It's not advised to include many self-citations, but you can most certainly include some if they are relevant to your research. There are a number of referencing managerial tools which could assist you in creating and managing your reference list. This becomes especially important since each journal has their own referencing style, and if you're doing it manually, like I still prefer to do it manually, but it takes a lot of time to convert the reference list, whereas these tools could convert the reference list to the correct style for you at a click of a button. So Mendeley, RefWorks, EndNotes are just some examples of which you could use. It's also important that journals do not want a bibliography which includes every source that you read, but they rather want every source that you cited to be included in the reference list. Most journals are alphabetical in order, so you list the authors at the end alphabetically, but some have a numerical system, whereas you place the order in which you cited or in-text referenced the authors in the text. That is the order that they go in the reference list. So there are some journals that use that. Then you have support material. So some journals allow you to upload additional information such as questionnaires, data sets, more advanced statistical analysis or additional statistical analysis, and video and audio material. Remember that in terms of statistical analysis, there is a length restriction. So there's only so much you can actually include in the article. So this provides you with the means to provide supplementary or support material. Yeah, now we come to the nitty-gritty of this workshop, which is the writing process, and I've divided this into a few sections. So before you can really start writing, you need to consider the journal's audience, their scopes and aims, their structure, their formatting, their referencing style, length restrictions, and other requirements. And much of this you get from the author guidelines. So how do many authors write? And I provided 4 steps. Many authors start with the table and figures, in other words, what they've actually found. Then they move to the methodology, they write the results and discussion sections. Then you write the introduction, literature review, and conclusion. And the 4th step is to write the title and abstract. So you usually, as I say later, you don't usually write the article from start to finish. And also they advise you not to edit the article when you're writing your first draft. I personally start with the findings, then I go to the methodology, introduction, literature review, discussion, conclusions, and end with the abstract. And then obviously as you go along, I would have been creating my reference list. But yeah, you generally can't write from start to finish. Yeah. So basically I say decide what sequence works for you, which sections you want to write first. And you'll work out your own style and own mechanisms and processes for doing this. It is very important that you read the articles, read some articles and download some articles to get a feel for the journal. So I usually start off by downloading several articles related to my topic, and this allows you to also get a feel for the journal style and formatting requirements, as well as maybe, the most recent topics that are related to your research. I also personally usually cite a couple of the journal articles from the journal I'm submitting to. I cite some of their work just to show that or demonstrate that my work is actually relevant. Although some advise against this because journals don't want excessive self-citations, and we'll come to this reason later in terms of impact factors. And some consider it to be unethical, but a couple of sources really does show that your work is relevant to that journal. Also, it's very important when writing to seek constructive criticism. So get guidance from more experienced researchers. It could be supervisors, colleagues, mentors, or other academics, or even you could use a platform such as ResearchGate or academia to ask professionals around the world for opinions on your work. And then it is very important to conduct language editing. Language editing, seek it from a professional grammarian or editor, because especially a lot of you, English is not your first language, or it may not be your strong point. So it is good to get your work edited by someone who does this as a living, and also just run your work through, the grammar and editing and spell check on Microsoft Word, so that that picks up a lot of errors as well. It won't pick up everything. So that's also important, because some articles have even been rejected by journals just because there were too many basic grammatical errors. So that's very important. Then a lot of you, particularly the students and some staff members, will be publishing from your thesis. And there are a few problems from this. Number one is a lot of staff and students, and even myself, who, when we did our thesis, your literature becomes dated by the time by the time the thesis has been passed by the reviewers, and now you want to write, and your literature is already 2 years old. So it is very important that if you publish in from your thesis, that you conduct a fresh literature review to get the most recent articles and sources on your topic. Also, many of your theses, as I say, are 200 pages to even 500 pages, as some of my colleagues' theses were, and journals restrict you to literally 300 to 10,000 words on average, with the most average word limit being 5,000 to 6,000 words. So this is problematic. You can't just copy and paste because your document is too long, and you need to convert your thesis into a format that fits with the journal's format. For longer articles, the journal will often want justification for why your article is so long. So it's important to extract the essence of your topic from the thesis. Be sure to provide a sufficient number of recent and relevant sources, so it mustn't be dated, to warrant your publication. Other factors to consider is who is the audience and reader, the language and writing style of the journal, originality and the finding significance, the research methodology depth. So although it's going to be much shorter than your thesis, you really need to provide depth of information. Basically every word counts, as well as enough detail to delineate or explain your topic sufficiently. Authorship's also important when publishing from a thesis, so you need to decide beforehand with your supervisor and co-supervisor who's going to be first, second, and third author. Generally, the person who contributes the most to the research or to the article, which in most cases would be the student. At least for the first article would be first author, and then it goes in order of contribution. The article submission, the question is, do you submit during or after the thesis completion? Sorry, I see there's a typo here. It shouldn't be competition, but completion. Well, it really depends. Most master students submit their article at the end because they only need to submit the article and have proof of submission. But this changes very much for doctoral students who need to have an article accepted. So if you leave your publication until once you've finished your thesis, it could be quite a long process before you get an article accepted. And you'll see this later when I get to a specific section. So for doctoral students, it's probably worthwhile if you're able to submit an article while you're still busy with the thesis, so that you do not delay your graduation. The next section is publish in ethics, and yeah, there's a few problems that authors do not adhere to a high level of ethical standards, and these create problems. So the most common problem, at least 50% of ethical cases in journal articles, is plagiarism. And this is where people use other people's work or content without giving them acknowledgement or credit. How do we acknowledge or credit someone? Well, this is usually done through in-text referencing and then placing their work in your reference list. So it's quite simple. How to avoid plagiarism, because some people may commit it unintentionally, is to use platforms such as Turnitin, Blackboard's SaferSign, or Crosscheck, or some other platform that could check your work against the worldwide repositories. Very important when using factors such as Turnitin and Blackboard is not to upload your document onto the repository, because if you do that, say the journal wants to check for plagiarism, and now you've uploaded it on the repository, then your article is going to get a percentage of 100%. So make sure your settings are correct and you don't have it permanently uploading onto the repository. Leave that to the journal. Another problem is research data falsification, so people just make up their data and results. Another one, probably the second highest, is duplication submissions or publications. And duplicate submissions is journals do not want you submitting your article to two journals at the same time. You need to submit one at a time, because what happens if they're both accepted? That creates all types of problems. Others publish articles from their research, maybe their thesis, and then they use exactly the same data and they try and get another article published or exactly the same content. There's nothing wrong, although a lot of journals are against this, publishing more than one article from your thesis if they are separate sections, and you know it's too big to publish in one article. But using exactly the same content and exactly the same findings is frowned upon. Authorship, the problem is, now you've written an article and now all of a sudden everyone wants to put their name in the article, yet they've done little or no work. Some people just say, I'll review your article, and you put your name on, and that's all they do. That, in my opinion, is not good enough for an author. They need to have done some work on other sections as well. Conflict of interest, so any personal aspects, or you may have been financially supported, which could affect your ability to disclose your research findings in an objective manner, should be disclosed as a conflict of interest. So this particularly is important when your research is funded by other people, which could skew your results. Also, research results misuse, so you could report your results that don't actually reflect your findings. Reviewer bias, so if you have contacts in a journal and you use it, that could be a problem. And confidentiality, it is also important to protect the names of your respondents and participants. There are a number of potential blocks to writing. So all academics experience this at some or other stage, some anxiety or ability where you struggle to write. This typically occurs when it's new subject matter, or it's an unfamiliar structure or styles, or even you have an international audience which you may be a bit intimidated because it's professionals, academics, and scientists around the world. As I said, everyone experiences writing block, and the first step is to overcome this. Is that everyone does experience it. There are a number of tools to get started with writing, and if you look at the research paper that I wrote on ResearchGate, I highlight a lot of the tools, but if you go to my reference list and you look at some of the sources, they give you detailed tools that you could use to start writing. Just some examples that the one author gave was to pretend that you've been interviewed about your paper, or it's to brainstorm 6 ideas, which is called cubing, which also to assess your topic via 3 columns: positives, negatives, and interest columns. Another is to ask people to read your work and for them to come up or select the best sentences. And then other authors even propose a technique called scamper, which stands for substitute, combine, adapt, modify, magnify, minify, put to another use, eliminate, reverse, or rearrange. So you can read about those techniques and those are just a couple, by looking at my reference list and going to those original sources. Another author suggests writing everything on one page, and then you start off with your purpose, literature review, research questions, and methodology as headings, and then you gradually expand on these sections, and then you start to add other sections, and you link them together to create the golden thread. My means to overcome writing block is to summarize in one journal article a day. So I suggest you search, read, and summarize one journal article a day using relevant headings such as the author, the research methodology, the main findings, and then possible limitations and future research, which could be used to identify research gaps for your introduction or your background to your research problem. And yeah, if you just summarize one article a day for 100 days, you have 100 summaries, which really could be a good way to start off writing. And yeah, my philosophy, as many people, is when eating an elephant, take one bite at a time. So yeah, don't try and write the whole article. You start bit by bit. Also, another means is relevant references. So while you summarize each journal article, you could find a number of other good sources in their reference lists, and then you go and search for those articles and you summarize them, and in those reference lists you will find more sources. So it's sort of like a snowballing approach, and that's a way to find a number of other good references. But it's important to find recent articles, because in the older articles those references are probably going to be too old in many instances to use many of them. And another tip is to just write 250 words a day, or 500 words a day, or 100 words a day. So yeah, that was Wiley who said that, because you may be overwhelmed of writing a manuscript of between 5 to 10,000 words. So just a small little target each day, and you stick to that, and again over a period of time you have a significant portion of writing. Major publishers offer workshops and free online training. Again, in the paper I've given you some direct links which you could use. For example, Elsevier has several workshops and online training which are for free, which will help get your creative juices flowing. Other publishers offer information and content and even videos and tutorials on their actual websites, so it's worth exploring those. Also, CPUT advertises a number of breakaways and workshops, internal workshops and even external workshops. So regularly Stellenbosch University offers writing breakaways, and here you actually write your article under the guidance of experts. Additionally, you can consult experienced researchers such as your supervisors or collaborators, or any other experienced researchers at your university or company to assist you and help you and bounce ideas off them. Often once you've got the topic, then it becomes easier, but finding the topic or the direction of the topic makes it a bit more difficult. So even before you start writing, you should target a specific journal. And there's a number of factors to take into consideration when selecting a journal. So firstly, generally, you should really look at the scopes and aims of the journal. And that will tell you whether your topic fits or does not fit. Also the types of articles, so you may want to do original research, but other people may want to do case studies, and it may not be fit in with that specific article, so take that into consideration. Also consider the readership, so local versus international. Maybe your topic's only really relevant here in South Africa, so you want a local audience, or you may want international exposure. Also consider current trending topics. So if your topic has been adequately covered in that journal long time ago, it's unlikely they're going to publish it unless you have a new angle or a new spin on that specific topic. But also by looking at trending topics could show you, my research fits in here because that's what's trending at the time. There are a number of other factors that you could consider. So yes, consider the author guidelines. Speak to more experienced colleagues. Also look at the DHET accredited databases because, so say your topic is retail related, you can do a research in those databases and find every single journal that has the word retail in it, which means, and from that then you could download the author guidelines and you could then find potential journals that match your topics. Also look at your own research, your own reference list, because a journal that you've cited maybe 3 or 4 articles from definitely is relevant to your research. And that's how I often look for journals. The journals that I've cited are the journals I attempt to publish in, seeing my topic must be relevant if I'm publishing so many or citing so many articles from those journals. Other factors could include the editorial board, the impact factor and journal metrics, which we'll come to later, international standing, who contributes to this journal, contributing scholars, the originality of the content, peer revision, the acceptance and rejection rate. You can download that often online, and you have journals where the acceptance rate is 5%, and that may put you off unless you feel your work is in the top 5%. We'll come to that again later. Typical time to publish as well. So some journals may take 3 years before they publish your work. So we'll speak about that more later. Page fees and open access. So some journals have hefty page fees because they're open access, so that may be a problem. And consider journals that you previously published in. Also, several authors say that you should not simply descend the stairs. In other words, that phenomenon means that you start with the top impact factor journals in the world, then you move to field specific journals, then other journals, and finally you move to your national or local journals. However, my personal experience is that I tend to receive better citations and metrics from international journals. Some have impact factors, but some don't have impact factors and still give you very good metrics and exposure. It really depends on who you want to read your research. Local journals generally do not receive the best metrics, at least that's my experience, versus the international journals where you struggle to get published in, so you're sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place. But I do generally target the international journals. They may or may not have an impact factor. And then often, even if your article's rejected, you get good reviewer feedback, which you can use to implement in other articles when targeting other journals. Also, articles with multiple topics, with a multitude or with multiple topics, let's make a note. So how do you write for a journal when your topic has many topics? Well, you need to place emphasis on that topic that best matches that specific journal scope. There also may be a number of possible publishers or journals under one publisher, so Elsevier or Emerald or Wiley or Sage, and you may find 3 or 4 journals that could match your topic, and they all have similar scopes, but they aren't exactly the same. So in that case, you need to really tailor your article to the specific focus of the journal. How do you do that? Well, best explained by an example. So yeah, we do all our research. Most of our research is done in Africa or South Africa. So say one of the journals had an African or a developing country focus. Then in your article, it would become very important to tailor your content and your scope to words or to such as developing country, Africa, emerging markets, South Africa in the article so as to definitely meet the scope of the journal. So but if your article got rejected and now you wanted to submit to another journal under the same publisher, which is quite beneficial because you don't need to change your structure, your referencing or format requirements, all of that stays the same. But what you would need to do then is tailor your article to the scope of that journal. So if it was from a marketing perspective, a social media marketing communications journal, then that is really the developing country part does not necessarily become is important to that journal, but more the social media marketing communications. So then you would need to tailor your journal to that specific content. Also, it's very important to select journals that are in the DHET accredited journal lists, and I've went through them before already. But as I say, there's over 25,000 journals on the Scopus Journal alone. Some international journals receive thousands and thousands of submissions, which each year, which makes it more difficult for your research to be selected. So in that case, I suggest that you try and find journals that don't receive thousands and thousands. And sometimes you get lucky and you find a journal that only receives a couple of hundred submissions each year, but they are on the DHET list and they receive good exposure. But because they're so specialized, there's not as a greater interest. So if your topic fits in with those journals that don't receive as many submissions, it increases your chances of getting past the initial editor screening and even your chances of being accepted. So it's worthwhile looking through those lists and identifying journals that will increase your chances of being published. Also consider the word limit of the journal, and this is a big thing for me, is that I really struggle to write journal articles for my type of research and writing style in under 7,000 words. Whereas other researchers, maybe a 3,000 to 5,000 word limit would be good for them. So do consider the limit or the word limit of the specific journal. Also consider the reviewer feedback time, because some journals take a long time to provide feedback, and now you're a doctorate student and you need an article published, and the journal comes back a year later with feedback. It's going to delay your graduation by a year. And again, you can search online and a lot of journals sort of tell you the feedback time or how long they take to give feedback. Then we go to journal metrics and measures. So the most common metric or measure of a journal, which a lot of academics look for, is an impact factor. And so journals, have various impact factors ranging from like 0.5 all the way up to hundreds, for the top medical journals. So what is an impact factor? It is basically the average number of citations per article published in a given year. So say 2019 divided by the total number of citable articles, so how many articles were published over the 2 preceding years, and that is divided into the number of citations in a given year, and that gives you the impact factor. For us though, really, anything with the impact factor in my, is good to be able to get published in, because generally you get better exposure. Then you get the SJR journal rank, which is the scientific prestige of the journals by calculating the weighted average values per article. Citations, weighted citation values of the articles. And basically what it is if other journals cite a particular source, they transfer their SJR value onto it. So if you have journals with high SJR citing your specific article, that their high SJR gets transferred to that journal. Then you get source normalized impact per paper, or SNP, refers to the number of citations of a journal per article relevant to the discipline, which enables a comparison between articles in various disciplines. Then you get a cite score, which is the average number of citations of a given year versus all the papers published over 3 years. And then also you consider the journal index lists. So some consider the ISI and the IBSSI lists to be the most prestigious, with others being less prestigious. So those are just some metrics, whereas most people really are just happy to get the article published in a DHET accredited journal, but some, the more experienced researchers, look for the other measures. The peer review process, and now you've finished writing your article and you've submitted your article. Generally, reviewers and editors are looking for innovative, unique, and original research, which is very much tailored to their scope and audience, and will also create excitement and interest from their audience. The main aims, though, of the peer review process is for the journal to receive the highest quality of manuscripts, to improve the quality of the manuscript, thorough referencing, ethical principles are maintained as well is important. Whereas editors and reviewers are looking for innovative, unique, and original research. They want clarity and significance of the research questions, objectives, and hypothesis. They want a good, sound, robust research methodology. They want the findings, suitable findings, and a good graphic presentation. And they also want the ethical issues taken into consideration. It's also worth adding that most editors-in-chief conduct an initial screening, because, you know, if a journal receives 5,000 articles a year, you can't possibly send that to your reviewers. So he often rejects, or she often rejects, the manuscript without sending to the reviewers, and only sends those that they believe has the greatest chance of acceptance by the reviewers. So some journals may, if you get 5,000 articles a year, some may reject 90% before and only send 10% to review, and that leaves 500 articles of which you can only accept 50. So it is important for journals to conduct the initial screen, no matter how frustrating it is to us. So the peer review process has a number of steps after the initial screening by the editor. Firstly, the journal identifies potential reviewers. They are selected and invited. They've usually sent the abstracts to decide if they are interested and have the necessary expertise to review the journal article, and it's usually anonymously reviewed. They get given a time frame which ranges from 1 to 6 months, although they don't always adhere to that. The reviewer's feedback is then sent to the author, and usually it comes back, you know, minor revision, major revision, or it could be even reject. But then the author needs to, if they have an opportunity to make revisions, they need to make these revisions, be the major or minor, and then they send it back to the reviewers. And this process is repeated over and over until the reviewers either accept the article or they decide to reject it. Thereafter, the article is sent to the actual journal, goes through the journal's formatting, production, and editing process. And after they've done their editing and put it in the correct format and structure, they'll often come back to the authors for additional minor corrections and clarifications. Now, so once that's happened, often your article is published online first and is not allocated to a volume or issue immediately. Sometimes this could happen up to a year later before there's the space or the correct scope or focus of the topic for them to allocate your research to a volume and issue. But it is important that your work does get exposure initially. So most journals sort of these days publish your work, and it could be published, as I say, for a year online before it receives a volume and issue. My personal experiences, Well, some articles from when I initially submitted to when they're eventually published in a volume and issue has taken up to 3 years, whereas in other cases, from when I first submitted to when it was accepted and published, it took 5 weeks. And this was for an international journal with a good impact factor. So when you find those type of journals, it's worthwhile taking note so that if you do need something published quite urgently, that the process could be quite quick. Also, yeah, you do need to do some research in specific journals to see how long they actually take to publish. So in terms of the review waiting period, I've had many journals that have taken a year to give me feedback. And by then, in my opinion, my research is becoming dated. I need to do a fresh literature review. So the question is, do I continue to wait and or do I withdraw? So, yeah, how long you're prepared to wait depends on several factors. Firstly, it depends on the quality of the journal and the number of alternatives available. If the journal is going to give you excellent exposure and is a good match for your topic and or has a decent impact factor which few journals can replicate, then I suggest that you wait. However, if there are a number of equivalent journals, then you could withdraw the manuscript and resubmit to another journal. However, the decision also depends on these alternative journals. How fast are they going to come and give you feedback? You could run into exactly the same problem at the same time. My personal experience, though, is usually just to wait, and then what I do is after a certain period of time, I contact the editor every couple of months until I get the response that I need. Also, it's very important to treat the reviewer's feedback as constructive criticism. It is an opportunity to make minor and major changes. And you've just to get past the initial editor's screening is an achievement. So I suggest you thoroughly scrutinize the reviewer's reports and attempt to address as many as possible, if not every single comment that they make. There may be some circumstances where you can't address every comment that they make, in which case you just politely provide greater explanation as to why you're unable to make that change. Occasionally, reviewers provide contradictory feedback. In this case, attempt to take middle ground. Also provide a detailed response to each comment or recommendation and cover letter, as well as use track changes or a different color in your manuscript itself. And what I often do is when my manuscript looks like World War II and there's so many changes with track changes and I know the reviewers are going to struggle to read it, what I do is if the upload platform allows it, I upload my manuscript twice. One with the track changes and one without the track changes, and I just indicate this clearly in my cover letter so that they are aware that I've uploaded the manuscript twice, and it just makes their job easier. However, sometimes reviewers come back with feedback that you cannot make. In this case, you would need to withdraw your manuscript. Examples that I personally received is they want to change your whole research approach, maybe from qualitative to quantitative or quantitative to qualitative, which means that you need to conduct new primary research. Others want to completely change your statistical analysis, sometimes to things that I've never heard about, so then I withdraw it. But what I do is implement as many of the changes as I can in my manuscript, so that my manuscript's being continually improved. And this just needs to happen a couple of times from various journals, and your article can really be transferred and then leads to a greater chance of acceptance. Also, a number of journals provide you with an open access option where you pay a fee, which then allows anyone to view your article and read your article across the world, which results in much improved exposure. The problem is if you don't have the opportunity to publish open access, is that individuals and institutions who have subscribed to that publisher journal will be able to view the article. But anyone else who wants to view the article will actually need to pay for that article. So that will lead to your article receiving much less exposure. Also, CPUT does subscribe to a number of publishers, but their membership sometimes is restricted by an embargo. So all the most recent research, which could be 6 months or 12 months, you're unable to download that article until that period has gone by. So best to publish open access if you're able to. Finally, the last aspect of this research is dealing with rejection, and yeah, this is quite difficult. Uh, the most common reason that people receive objective or receive rejection is that the journal is perceived not to match the scope of the journal or is not relevant or original. There are a number of other reasons that they give you, although in many cases I believe it's just a standard form. They look through your research and think, not good enough, and then they just send you a standard response. But other reasons is the content is a reformation of what is already known, so they don't believe it's original. Major methodological issues, poor, insufficient, or inappropriate statistical analysis, poor writing style and quality, poor level of English, too many major errors, does not adhere to the author and formatting guidelines, and that is an inexcusable problem that many authors make. You should really adhere to every element that they ask you to. An inadequate response to reviewers' comments. So, and the reason why, as I say, they reject quite quickly, even without going to review, is they receive, as I said, many publications. Could be 5,000, or many submissions. Could be 5,000 submissions, and they only publish 50 of these. So the journal editors can afford to be selective regarding what they perceive as the higher quality, what they perceive as innovative, unique, and original, to attract the greater readership, which would obviously lead to better impact factors and metrics for them. It's my experience that probably 50 to 60% of submissions don't even make it to review, and then from the review, another 3/4 of those are rejected. So for some journals, as little as 10% or even 5% of the original articles that were submitted will ultimately be published. It really just depends on the journal, whether it's a major international journal or what level of journal. It is also possible for your manuscript to be rejected after the review revisions, and I've had experience, and I think many other people have had this experience, where I've made all the reviewers' changes to their satisfaction, but afterwards the editor decides, nope, this journal's findings, this article's findings are contrary to what this journal wants to achieve, so then they just decide to reject it, even though you've done everything they've asked, and this does happen fairly frequently. The key is, though, is to learn and use the reviewer's feedback. So if you reject it, but they do give you feedback and are made to review, make as many changes as possible. And if it gets rejected a second and third time, keep making the changes. And after this has happened a few times, you'll truly be amazed at how much the article has improved. And this is how you learn. And those changes you can also apply to other journal articles, because hopefully you won't make the second mistake twice. My personal experience, really, how I grew as a researcher was I was very lucky to have a couple of editors that really took me under my wings as a novice researcher, although I still consider myself a novice. And they nurtured me by meticulously reviewing my work, and they suggested extensive changes before my manuscript went for review. And then it went to the major revision, minor revision, editorial changes until eventually it was published. And although it was a painful and laborious process, some of my best work has been produced through that process. Wiley states, treat a rejection as the start of the next submission. And yeah, I do have again another slide which for some reason oh no, there's another point here. Successful academic author traits is my last point. So what are successful academic author traits? Well, it's readiness to adapt your writing style depending on the writing task at hand. Be able to immerse yourself into the literature of the selected discipline. Develop original ideas. It takes meticulous work and dedication to fashion a manuscript. Show courage in subjecting your work to peer review, because you really do need to be courageous. display confidence to establish an authoritative writing voice, exhibit persistence and resilience in the face of constructive criticism and rejection from editors and reviewers, and show humility that not all your papers will be similarly or equally good. So those are just a very brief overview of my workshop on publishing or perishing, or my writing workshop. Down below are some very good references, and I'll just highlight some. So Beale's list is there. Okay, this is house journals. Some workshops, I got some information from various CPUT sites. Writing for Publication, a guide for new authors, is a very good journal article. I've also used some of my sessions from the master sessions, which are on YouTube, which you can use, and you'll see them there. Understanding the publishing process, how to publish in scientific and medical journals, Elsevier and Elsevier, another one, Understanding the Publish Process, very good sources. You could also find these sources for Wiley, Emerald, Sage, have similar type of workshops. Fisher, Guidelines for Writing a Research Paper, also another good one. Here is a whole book, Writing for Publication, Transitions and Tools that Support, by Springer, very well written. You'll get a lot of information from there. Kendall and Tackett's another source. New and Wu is another Elsevier, which is very good. Rhodes University provides a good source. Writing for Publication Notes, another source. Some other websites are consulted. Van Dam's another Elsevier workshop. Wiley has a good document as well. And here's another website source that you could use. So have a look at these sources as well. I would like to thank you for going through or listening to this workshop. And I'll just go to the beginning. So it's Rodney Duffett signing off. I hope you got some benefit, and a reminder is that you can go to the full paper link as well, which could provide you with some more additional information which I wasn't able to cover in this workshop.